Hello. This is my long ISP, the weather station, which consists of an ESP32 which connects to the internet and shows the temperature of 5 different cities. For this project, I decided to show the temperature of Toronto, Washington, Paris, Madrid, and London. The city appears on the LCD screen, while the temperature of the city appears on two 7-segment displays via two shift registers. I also have two buttons, and one button toggles the city, while the other changes the temperature. Unfortunately, the PSP doesn't work because of a short in the circuit, but I'll still demonstrate it. So in order for the circuit to work, I'll first need to connect it to my computer. So connect it like that. And then I'll also need to run the program on my computer as shown here. And then once that compiles, I'll have to connect the ESP32 to a hotspot on my phone. So it's doing that right now. And we can see the weather data for the different cities in the serial monitor. So it takes some time since it does collect the data from an API, and there's a bit of a delay between each API request. So the temperature in Toronto is negative 3.8, Washington would be 3.3, Paris is negative 0.9, Madrid is 0.4 degrees Celsius, and London is 3 degrees Celsius. So here's how it works. The API I'm using for my project is the Free Weather API, which collects the temperature data for my project, and it gets the data in JSON and XML format. But for the purpose of my project, I'm using JSON since it's easier to handle for Arduino. And first, I need to get an API key, which is right here, and you'll see this in my code, which is how I access this API. And here's an example of the weather data for London, so you can see the name here and the region. And then all I need to do is go to the current label, which you'll see in my code, and then pull the temperature in Celsius and in Fahrenheit for my project. And here's how I do this in Arduino. This is the code for the project. I've included 4 libraries. The first is the Wi-Fi one, so the ESP32 can connect to the internet. These 2 libraries allow for the parsing of data from an API, which is where the weather data is collected from. And this is the library for the LCD screen. So here are the Wi-Fi credentials, and this is the hotspot on my phone. This is the network name. This is the password for it. Then I initialize pins for the LCD, and these 3 pins, clock, latch, and data, allow for values to be shifted to the 7-segment display. And in order to access the API, I need to use an API key, which I received from creating an account. And here's the URL for the API, which is just Free Weather API. Here are the 5 cities that I want to show the temperature of. And this is the array for the 7-segment display, which goes from 0 to 9. And this allows the city to be toggled, and this pin here changes the temperature from Celsius to Fahrenheit and vice versa. And basically these variables allow for the debouncing of the buttons. So in the setup, I'm basically initializing the LCD, then I enable connection to the internet. I also set clock, latch, and data as output, allow for the buttons that can change both the temperature and the city, and then display the weather. So in the void loop, I'm just handling the debouncing of the 2 buttons that I've already discussed. And I also have a function here that converts the temperature in Celsius to Fahrenheit. The next function is display weather, which gets the current city from the city index of the 5 cities. And then I have another function called get weather data, which retrieves the data for that current city from an API. And then I want to display that temperature on 7-segment displays, and then show the city name on the LCD screen. The next function, get weather data, retrieves data about a specific city and calls the HTTP client, which enables communication from the ESP32 to the API. And I call the API here, which is the URL. And then I create a response code, which is enabled by using the http.get function, and a response code of 1 means the response code was successful, which then means this statement will be true. And then I call all the data that I get from the API a payload, which is called http.getString. And I call the function parse weather data. So I want to parse the data from the API into into data that is friendly for the nano. And then I end the HTTP request. The next function, parse weather data, basically parses the data from the API, which is in JSON format, and outputs it onto the serial monitor. And the last two functions, show time and display temperature, basically output the temperature onto the 7-segment display.